class is going to be similar. Sorry, I'm recording here. This presentation is going to be similar to one we offered earlier in the spring about sweet potato production, but I've added some information about troubleshooting pests and things like that. We will be recording this presentation, so we'll send you a link and a follow-up email so you can watch it later. We'll also send you an evaluation, and we'd really appreciate if you would fill that out, because we need the feedback for our grant reporting, but also we want to know what you learned and what else you need to learn. We'll also be sending you some production guides for growing sweet potatoes. For questions, we'll hold most of the questions to the end, but if you have kind of a clarification question or something that feels urgent, feel free to just put it in the chat box, and Jess will interrupt and ask that question. So I'm Laurel Moulton. I work with the WSU Regional Small Farms program. I specialize in integrated pest management on diverse farms. I help local small farms with technical assistance and things like that. This presentation is brought to you by Western SARE, who provided a 3-year grant to study sweet potatoes, specifically wireworm resistant sweet potatoes, and also just figuring out general production practices that will be successful for our area. This presentation was also brought to you with the help of Srijana Shritha, who is a PhD student at the Northwest Research and Extension Center in Mount Vernon. She introduced me to growing sweet potatoes here. She's now on to studying growing tea, but she created a great instruction, so I'm following in her footsteps to share this with you. My intention for this presentation was to have some interaction at the end with farmers who have experience growing sweet potatoes. I'm going to share the basics with you, but we find it's really valuable to get input from local folks who've tried these things and maybe found other things work. So the farmers I invited couldn't make it tonight, but I'm going to be sharing input that they've given to me. If you have grown sweet potatoes and you've found some tips and tricks, I hope that you'll chime in at the end and share that with others who are present. Okay, so with that, I'm just gonna move forward. Okay, so I'll just start off with sweet potatoes. They are different than potatoes. They're also different than yams. Yams are oftentimes, the word yam is oftentimes used for sweet potatoes. Usually it's the darker colored sweet potatoes that are referred to as yams, but yams are actually a completely different species and even a different plant family. They're a tropical plant and they are not typically grown in the United States. What we have here are sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are related to bindweed. They're in the Convolvulaceae family, so they aren't susceptible to the same diseases as potatoes. So sweet potatoes are a really good crop to put in your rotation if you're able to grow them just as a disease prevention type of thing. So I'm getting some feedback, sorry. Okay. Sweet potatoes are a nutritious crop. In addition to just growing interesting crops, farmers around here are interested in growing sweet potatoes because they're high in all sorts of vitamins, and they're also a staple food crop for some people who have food sensitivities. And so when we're trying to feed our whole community, it's really important to have alternative crops for folks that are sensitive to the usual ones. Sweet potato consumption across the United States has grown hugely just between 2000 and 2014. The sweet potato consumption per capita grew from 4 to 7.5 pounds. I hate to think about what it is now, but it's probably more. Sweet potatoes are an important crop worldwide. They likely originated in South America, and they're seventh in food production after wheat, rice, corn, potato, barley, and cassava. Here in the United States, I'm sure many of you are here because you're thinking, well, sweet potatoes don't grow here. Those grow in the Southeast. And those are the major production zones in the United States, North Carolina, other locations in the Southeast, and Southern California also is a big sweet potato grower. But interestingly, they do pretty well here in the northern United States, because our extra day length kind of makes up for some of the heat that we don't have, that they have in the southern United States. So their climate requirements, they require a minimum frost-free period of 4 months. The air temperature they prefer is above 75 degrees, ideally between 77 and 85. And those aren't regular temperatures around here, at least not for the whole summer. They need a soil temperature of 65 to 85. Higher is okay, but we try at least to get that minimum 65 degrees in soil temperature. Around here, just because it's a little bit cooler, we have to add, we have to give it some help. So usually that comes in plastic mulch, or some people grow their sweet potatoes in low tunnels or high tunnels or greenhouses. The long day length favors the production of roots. So we do have an advantage here, as I mentioned, with our long days. And they prefer sandy loam soil with kind of a neutral pH between, well, I guess it can be kind of acidic, but between 5 and 7.5. So they have a nice range of pH that they can take. And sandy loam soil is ideal, but not required. You just have to, be a little bit more careful if you have more clay in your soil. The key steps for successful sweet potato production in the Northwest include choosing a suitable cultivar. That's really important because, as you guys know, with many of the warm season, well, all of the warm season crops, it really matters that you get a variety that has the fewest days to maturity. You'll have to produce slips. You can buy slips, which are just vine cuttings that you'll plant, but producing your slips can save you money, and also help with the prevention of importing diseases with plant material. Around here, plastic mulch is helpful. At the Northwest Research and Extension Center, they were looking at comparing black polyethylene plastic mulch, which is the standard on farms, with biodegradable mulch, and they got good results there. Unfortunately, the biodegradable mulch is hard to come by and not certified for organic use. I put a star by plastic mulch because we've actually, there are farmers in Kitsap County that don't use any type of mulch. They just, they're in a warm enough spot that they don't need that extra protection. But yet other farmers use low tunnels, thin plastic film, where they just, as the, low tunnels filled up with vines, they'll just rip holes in the sides to get more air circulation. So there's multiple ways you can create the extra warmth. Curing is also very important. As you'll see through this presentation, since sweet potatoes are grown in much warmer and often humid areas, humidity and warmth is important to not only the propagation, production, but also curing. Storage is another important step. And if you don't cure them properly, then you'll have a hard time with storage. So okay, so here's just some examples of varieties. Around here, we found that you need to choose the short season varieties, and also some mid-season varieties will work. So in this chart, the early season varieties say 90 to 100 days, and the mid-season varieties are 101 to about 115. There are longer season varieties. For example, all of the purple ones that I know about are those tend to be long season varieties, so they're harder to grow here. In addition to the varieties on this list, in our trials, we are growing Beauregard and Covington, so an early season variety and a mid-season variety. They're kind of two of the standard sweet potatoes grown across the United States. And then we're also growing other varieties that are short and mid-season varieties. Some of them are named, and some of them are breeding lines that come straight from the sweet potato breeding program in North Carolina that they've helped identify as varieties that might do well here. In addition to these on the list, just a tip from some local farmers, there's a sweet potato called Mahon Yam that a few farmers have found a lot of success with. And then also white sweet potato varieties that folks have grown successfully here include Bonita and O. Henry. So give some of those a try. So for sweet potatoes, you can just order slips from various companies. There's some of the seed companies that you might be familiar with, like Johnny Seeds or Fedco. You can buy sweet potato slips from them. There's also larger producers in California and in the Southeast, but sweet potato slips are not too hard to do. So they are, I keep saying slips, basically they're vine cuttings. Varieties differ in their ability to produce slips, the number of slips anyway. And so usually you can estimate that one sweet potato will give you between 10 and 20 slips or plants. You need to select healthy, blemish-free and damage-free sweet potatoes that are about an inch and a half to 3 inches in diameter. And you can see this picture up here. It's just like regular potatoes. They grow these leafy stems, but unlike regular potatoes, you don't cut up the sweet potato and stick that in the ground. You just pick off these vines here and plant those. You can see here some of them are actually already producing roots. For the slip production, this actually should start in April around here. It takes a while. I think several farms that participated in our studies got surprised this year that it went slower than they thought. So basically, you'll fill a tray. You want a tray that has some holes in the bottom of it. You place the sweet potatoes in it so they're not touching, and cover them half to 3/4 of the way with just your standard seed starting mix. You can add some fertilizer if you want, but not much. You need heat and humidity. So you can put them on a heat mat. You just have to be careful because some heat mats have thermostats. So you have to know your heat mat and just make sure you don't cook your potatoes. Instead, there has to be some regulation of temperature going on so it doesn't get too hot. You'll moisten the mix, but you don't want them soaking wet all the time. And then cover it with some type of cover. In this case, we're showing just the plastic covers you can get that fit these trays, but you should never close it all the way. You want high humidity, but not a ton of condensation and dripping water because they'll rot. It's kind of a little bit of a balance. If you don't have a heat mat, other folks have tried putting space heaters under the, if you have them on a bench like this, if you can kind of drape some type of, tarp or something over it to keep the heat in a little bit, you can try putting space heaters under the bench or other innovations that you might come up with. So throughout the process, you will keep the trays moist but not soggy. It will take 2 to 3 weeks for them to just start sprouting. So you have to be patient. And then it will take a few weeks after that to actually get slips that are up to the right size to plant. So this is something you need to start early, and the requirements are different than other crops you might have in your greenhouse. So you have to think about that. we say to cut the vines when they're about 8 inches tall, have 5 leaves and strong stems. But this year, for example, even the folks that started their their slip production on time, it was just a slow year for temperature. We're not sure really all that went into it. But we were planting slips that were as short as 2 or 3 inches. It's just with any type of vegetative cutting, the energy that the plant needs to produce roots is in that stem and in the leaves. And so having 8 inches is just going to get you more energy to start, to have a better start of your sweet potato plant. So cut the vines when they're about 8 inches tall. Leave some leaves on. You can strip the lower leaves on the stem. And we say to cut the vines 1 to 2 inches above the soil mix to prevent disease and insect transfer. If you're using if you're using sterile potting mix, or you're not there, you may not have to worry about that. This is just an extra step you can take if you're worried about disease transmission. Otherwise, it's okay to get some soil on there. Okay, so the number of slips per 20 feet, this is just an example. Sweet potatoes are planted with different spacing. It depends on who's doing it. We're actually doing some trials at the Northwest Research and Extension Center about the ideal distance between plants. So if you're 8 inches is fine, 12 inches is fine, 15 inches is fine. In my trials, I'm just using 12 inches. 8 inches tends to get you more sweet potatoes per area, but they're also going to be smaller. With bigger spacing, you'll get bigger sweet potatoes. So anyway, so this is just an example number of slips needed per 20 row feet. So after you cut the slips, it's really tempting to put them in a glass of water and help them and let them develop roots. But we actually encourage you to plant the cuttings directly. You can cut the slips a day or two ahead of time, as long as you store them in kind of not the refrigerator, but in kind of a not too hot place in the shade. Or you can cut them as you're planting them and just take them off the roots and plant them directly in the ground. A lot of people will root them in water, but this actually leads to poor root system development. The first roots that are produced from the cutting are actually the roots that are going to turn into what you eat. So it's better if those are growing directly in the soil instead of growing in water first and then being jammed into the soil. There are some folks that do cut their slips, and you can do this and just pop them in pots, and you leave them in the greenhouse for a while, preferably on a heating mat, and you can get the roots started in 4-inch pots. But that's you can do that, but you have to do it very carefully, because again, those first roots that are produced off of the cutting are what are going to turn into your sweet potatoes. So if your cuttings get root bound, then you end up with really curly sweet potatoes. And who knows, maybe you don't care about that, or you have a small enough customer base that they kind of like quirky vegetables, but you may not want twisty roots. So let's see, I covered this. So never store them in the refrigerator. This is a tropical or subtropical plant. And so there was a farmer who was storing their slips in the fridge that they didn't use, and I went and picked them up, and they actually got cold damage just from being in the refrigerator. Another farmer was storing their slips in a cooler that it must not have been as cold, because it actually helped prolong the life of them. So it's okay for them to experience cool temperatures, just not cold. Try to keep them definitely above 55 degrees, and in the 60s is even better. We recommend planting on overcast days. That's not always possible, but you can just jam them in the ground and water them really, really quickly. Here's a photo of the planting process. These slips in the lower left-hand corner, those I think sat out for 2 days, kind of in warm shade, so they're a little bit wilted. And honestly, when you plant them, the next day or a week later, they're gonna look dead, or they may look dead, but they have this amazing ability to kind of pop back up when you think all is lost. So if you dare, plant your slips directly without rooting them, and just make sure they're well watered, and wait for them to come back up. Okay, so for planting, we recommend planting them 3 to 4 weeks after the last frost-free date. These really need warm temperatures, and you want the soil temperature to be a minimum of 65 degrees. So our planting date at the research center and areas around here is usually about the first week of June. Although I talked to a farmer in Kingston who said they typically plant in the middle of May. So if you're lucky and you get warmer earlier, go ahead and put your sweet potatoes in, but you just want the weather to be reliably on the warm side. You can pre-lay your plastic to warm up the soil, and you can just stick a thermometer in there. But as soon as your soil gets to 65 degrees, you're kind of out of danger of frost, you can go ahead and plant them. Sweet potatoes are not heavy feeders, and in fact, if you give them too much nitrogen fertilizer, you're going to have a lot of vine growth and not a lot of root production. So the basic recommendation is, I think it's 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, or a half pound of nitrogen for a 20-foot row. So low fertility. One of the farms I work with, they just fertilize with manure. So just, you can experiment. So black plastic mulch, or the low tunnels, or a greenhouse, you just want to raise the temperature. Planting distance is 8 to 15 inches. And then most people recommend 4 to 6 feet between rows. The vines, they can wander, and it just depends on whether you want to walk between your rows or conduct cultivation activities, weeding. So 6 feet is great. You can go with less if you need to. For irrigation, you want to keep the soil moist, but overwatering can cause root rotting. And right now I'm actually trying to figure out, there's one farm that had pretty poor establishment of the cuttings of the slips that they planted. I'm trying to figure out if overwatering was part of that or not. But basically, before they have roots, you want to keep them moist, because they need that water around them, but just don't drown them. At the research center, they apply about a ½ inch of water per week under the plastic, just to give you an idea. They don't have sandy soil, but it's not clay either. So that's just, a number to think about. And of course, weeding, if you're planting on plastic, of course, you're going to have to yank some weeds out of the planting holes. But otherwise, you can just do some shallow cultivation as you see fit.
Really quick, Laurel, there's a question in the chat. I know you did touch on the nitrogen piece of it, but what do you have a recommendation for folks on the ratio for fertilizer for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium ratio?
Good question. Typically the nutrient that is most in need in our area is nitrogen, just because that nitrogen is mobile and it will wash out over the winter. I would recommend getting a soil test to see what your nutrient profile in your soil is, because at least in Clallam County, oftentimes our soils have plenty of phosphorus and oftentimes plenty of potassium. And so you may not even need a fertilizer that has those nutrients in it, and you can just go with straight nitrogen. So That's a long way of saying it varies between soils. So I would get a soil test and see if you actually need the other two nutrients. When we do fertilizer recommendations, we tend to focus on the nitrogen.
Okay.
Okay. I hope that answered the question.
I think it did.
Okay, so for basically your sweet potatoes, they'll just grow through the season. Sweet potatoes don't have a specific ripening time. It's just whenever they're big enough for you to want to harvest them. So we say check after 80 days, you can harvest as they're big enough. But around here, you'll probably need most of the season for the roots to size up. We recommend that you harvest them before the soil temperature drops below 55 degrees, just because they'll store better if they don't experience cold. They should never experience a hard freeze. The vines are okay with a light frost, but if you're starting to get frost, it's probably time to get those out of the ground. You stop watering them a week ahead of time. It's easier if you cut the vines off ahead of time, and those vines, one farmer I worked with, cut them off and gave them to their pigs because they also raise pigs. And the pigs were kind of like, meh, okay, sure, we'll eat it. It wasn't their favorite, but in some areas, sweet potato vines are a common livestock fodder, so it's definitely worth a try. Anyway, cut the vines to get them out of the way. You can dig with a shovel or a fork, or if you're on a larger farm and you have a potato lifter, having a potato lifter is great. You just need to be careful when you're harvesting them, because any bruising or rubbing off of the skin can create an opening for rot or trouble with storage. So oftentimes the sweet potatoes are a little bit further out from the plant than you think. So if you're using a fork, just start far away and kind of, gradually move towards the plant. Some of those injuries will heal in the curing process. So it's not the end of the world if you scrape a few. It's if you can leave them in the field to dry a little bit, you just don't want them to experience cold temperatures or glaring sun. But if you can leave them to dry in the field, if you have the right conditions, you can do that. But just don't let them stay exposed to the sun for very long.
There's another question, Laurel, in the chat about they've never seen commercial potatoes have this, but do you have to worry with sweet potatoes about the green spots like you do with red russet potatoes? Red or russet potatoes?
Oh, the green skin and potatoes? No. These sweet potatoes are from a completely different plant family. The toxin, I'm forgetting what it's called, that's in potatoes, that's specific to the Solanaceae family. So with sweet potatoes, you don't have to worry about that. They're not going to turn green from light, and they won't develop a toxin. They're a completely different plant family.
Thanks.
Okay, so I just wanted to put something in here about harvesting the greens. Sweet potato greens are actually a traditional food for some West African folks, and also somebody I know who grew up in the Southeast said, "Oh yeah, we ate sweet potato greens all the time." So yeah, I would go ahead and try them. I haven't tried them myself yet. I can't wait to do it. We're actually, as part of our research, we're also looking into green harvest, and then I'm hoping to host a class about cooking and marketing greens. But basically, we don't know how much greens harvest is okay, because if you take all the leaves away, that's going to impact the size of the roots. So you probably shouldn't harvest them till the plants are bigger, and then just harvest them lightly. And hopefully we'll have some data about how much of the greens you can harvest without impacting the roots too much. But they're really nutritious, great for people, great for animal fodder as well. So more to come on that. Okay, so for the greens, obviously just cook, harvest them fresh. and eat them right away. But with the roots, before you eat them, you have to cure them because they don't taste good when they're right out of the ground. The curing process helps change some of that starch into sugars, and so they get their flavor through the curing process. You'll need to start curing them on the same day you harvest them. You should never wash the roots, just brush off the soil. And of course, the curing process can heal some wounds, and but not all. So this is another clincher. So in addition to the slip production, where you need high temperature and high humidity, you also need high temperature and high humidity to cure sweet potatoes successfully. Well, it takes longer if you don't have quite the right conditions. So ideally, the conditions are 80 to 90 degrees and 85 to 90% humidity, but not with standing water, like dripping condensation on them. So you can imagine that's kind of a difficult condition to create in our climate. You need ventilation, and if you have these perfect conditions, it just takes a week or 10 days to cure them. You can do it at a lower temperature with a little bit less humidity, and it just might take 2 to 3 weeks. You can try using a humidifier. One farmer that I talked to last year said, she has a very small farm, and she said that she just put her sweet potatoes in a paper bag and put that inside a box that was lined with a black plastic bag, and left the black plastic bag partially open, and then put that whole thing next to her wood stove. So there's various ways you can do it. Here's an example that they use at the research station. They cure it they have temperature controlled greenhouses. So they put the roots in plastic crates, and then they create a frame, and they drape plastic over it, and then they use a humidifier as well. There is a farm that we're going to visit. Actually, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this class, we have other classes coming up, and in October, the date is going to be announced. We're going to have an on-farm tour to see one farmer's innovative way of curing sweet potatoes. So anyway, you'll just have to get creative about creating the high temperature and the high humidity without condensation. But again, you can do it at a lower temperature. It'll just take a little bit longer. Okay, so for storage, ideal storage temperatures are 55 to 60 degrees, and 75 to 80% humidity in the dark. If they experience temperatures below 55 degrees, they can get chilling injury, and above 60 degrees, they can start sprouting. You need good ventilation. Again, here's a system they came up with at the research center. This is in a temperature controlled greenhouse, and they store them in paper bags inside plastic crates, and they have temperature controls, and then they just drape them with shade cloth. However, this is Carol Miles, who is the director of the research station. She said, well, look how I store mine in my garage. So she just puts them in plastic crates in her garage. I don't think the garage is heated, but it must be insulated well. And she said that you can see in that crate there, she stores them with her regular potatoes. And obviously those sweet potatoes have been cured well. If you don't cure them well, they're going to be prone to rot in storage. But anyway, she stores them just fine in her garage for up to 6 months. Okay, so I do want to cover pests and diseases of sweet potatoes, because these are the things, as a farmer, you're going to have to worry about. You need a crop to harvest, to feed yourself and feed the community. So first of all, the first pest is wireworms. This is one of two major pests in our area. And some of the varieties that we've included in our research are wireworm resistant, because wireworms are really hard to deal with in an organic system. So wireworms, the holes can be an entry point for pathogens. Also, I don't know, customers don't like holy sweet potatoes. Anyway, so we do have there's a new variety that was just released called Cascade that we're trialing on farms out here. It has pretty good yields and pretty good resistance to wireworms. Currently at the research station, there's one more wireworm resistant variety that was supposed to be released for public planting at the end of last summer. And I was hoping to include that in our trials as well. But at the last minute, there's all sorts of criteria that go into whether the breeding program thinks they're ready to release it. And apparently that one, they felt that it had excess latex production or something like that, which Carol Miles and Sherry Jana at the research station, they said it wasn't a characteristic that they noticed in the plants they grew, but nevertheless, it was something that kept it from being released. So that's the long way of saying there are other varieties that we're looking at that could be great possibilities for growing in our area and having some resistance to this pest that's really hard to deal with. So this is, I think these potatoes here are Covington, and I'm not sure what these are, but anyway, there's lots of holes versus just a few holes. I think I'd be more okay with just a few holes, even if it's not perfect. I just added this in here, the spotted cucumber beetle. This is not a pest that's really common in our area, but I've started getting reports of it, so I thought I'd better say something. The spotted cucumber beetle is a potential pest for sweet potatoes in other sweet potato growing regions. The adults feed on the leaves, so you'll get kind of irregular holes in the leaves, but typically the adult feeding is not enough to cause any actual real damage to the crop. It's actually the root feeding, the larvae, their feeding causes holes similar to wireworms. So, with the same effects, places for other bacteria or fungal diseases to get in, and then also producing a product that customers may not like as much. So another pest around here is deer. And I discovered last year that that deer love sweet potato vines. The picture on the left is what the sweet potatoes looked like at the time of harvest. So that would be in mid-September at a farm in Port Angeles that we're doing the trial on. The second picture is what the sweet potatoes looked like in an area where the deer discovered them. And so you can see these are the poor sweet potato plants, and here's some naked vines, and the deer just kept coming back, and they just ate them down to nubs. And you can see all the deer footprints, they stuck their little hooves through the plastic. So that's kind of a no-go. When these plants are constantly getting nibbled on and just the foliage is decimated, that just leads to tiny roots. So on this farm, which was in a warmer microclimate than the farm in Port Angeles, I expected the harvest to be much better there. And instead we got these little tiny mini sweet potatoes that I thought, well, I don't know, maybe you can put them in a roasting mix with other mini potatoes, but they almost weren't worth the time of harvesting because the roots were so small. So if you have deer and you don't have a fence, row cover can offer some protection. So start there, but put up a fence if you want good sweet potatoes. Oops. Okay. The next pest are voles. And I gotta be honest, I'm not sure what, I don't think there's any good options for managing voles. And if you have any root crops, there'll be a problem for those too. Some recommendations that I've heard are that if you keep the area around the field mowed and tilled. So you're taking out weeds and cover that can reduce pressure from voles if you're having a bad year. Also encouraging raptors on your farm can help. We hope in the coming year to have some classes with some raptor experts that will be able to speak more to how to encourage them to come to your farm and how much they can help with your rodent problems. And then there's also, you can trap voles if you have a small enough operation that makes sense to you. But voles can really cause a lot of damage to your sweet potatoes. And in fact, one farm that used to try to grow sweet potatoes completely gave up when they had a bad vole year, bad voles a couple of years in a row. So diseases. As I mentioned earlier, sweet potatoes are a really good crop to add to your crop rotations because they're not related to any other crop that you're planting. They are related to bindweed, or morning glory. So if you have that on your farm, they're susceptible to the same diseases. But I wanted to talk about this disease, sweet potato scurf. It's a fungal disease, and it was brought to our attention because a farmer, I can't remember if it was they were somewhere in Washington. It might have been the east side. They got this disease, and they got it from the slips that they ordered. So this is a place that you really can avoid disease transmission by growing your own slips using healthy tubers on your own. This farm ordered their slips from a company and got a disease with it. So scurf, it won't show up on the foliage. The damage won't show up on the foliage. You can't tell if you order slips and they are infected with this disease because it's just not, there aren't foliar symptoms that I know of. You'll find out when you harvest them and you have all these, this kind of, these lesions, this kind of black gray color on the skin. This disease can stay in the soil for 1 to 3 years. If you have bindweed or morning glory that you battle on your farm, that can perpetuate the disease because it's in the same family. So anyway, disease transmission can be through plant material and also infested soil. For managing this disease, using certified roots, and when I say certified, I mean certified disease-free or certified disease-free vine cuttings, growing your own works, and then also contamination from other tools. So somehow if another farm has this and you're borrowing tools from them, just make sure you clean them in between. And again, if you have morning glory or bindweed in your fields, those are plants that can perpetuate it. Otherwise, you just don't grow sweet potatoes there for 2 or 3 years, and you should be good to go again. There's also viruses that infect sweet potatoes, and there's this one is an example of, let's see, I wrote it down. I think it's feather spot virus, and there's a few others, but basically the transmission comes through plant material, or if you're using the same tools on a virus infected plant and then moving over, that can transmit it. So again, it's best to avoid it by using certified virus-free roots or vine cuttings or slips. But also, as with most horticultural crops, sometimes they just have viruses, and the more virus load you get, the more symptoms that you're going to get. So if you are propagating your own slips and you're saving your own tubers from year to year, it's recommended that you get new propagation stock or new roots. I keep saying tubers. Sweet potatoes are not tubers, they're actually roots. So sorry about that. So you should just get new planting stock that's certified disease-free every few years. Or if you notice that your slips or your slip production isn't as vigorous, or your plants aren't as vigorous, or you start getting leaf symptoms that are consistent with a virus, then we would recommend that you just start over again with certified disease-free stock. Okay, so at the Northwest Research and Extension Center in Mount Vernon, this photo on the left is Srijana Shritha, who actually created most of this presentation, and who I had the privilege of working with last year. She's on to new things now, but she's still kind of advising the project. At the station, they are growing common varieties like Covington and Beauregard, multiple wireworm resistant varieties. They actually, since they're a secure research station, they can get breeding lines from the USDA sweet potato breeding program that are not released to the public yet. So they're trying all sorts of fun things. In addition to that, on the research station, we have gotten recommendations from farmers throughout Washington who have grown sweet potatoes, and if they have a variety that they want us to try or they've tried and had success with, those are going to be being grown at the research station this year. And in addition, they're doing the plant spacing trials to just, see yields and root size that come from different spacing. And let's see, what else are they doing? They're doing all sorts of fun stuff. And you can come and see it if you want. We have a field day that's going to be on September 6th. September 7th. So after Labor Day, you can come out to the Northwest Research and Extension Center and see all their trials. You'll be able to see all the varieties growing next to each other. You can see in these photos that there's definitely different qualities to the growth rate and the color and just kind of the growth habits of the sweet potatoes. So you'll be able to see a lot of different varieties side by side. This September 7th is late enough in the year that we'll be able to pull up some of the roots so you can see the difference between the varieties and the size of the roots. So anyway, you'll see more information coming out about that soon. So with that, here's some of the crew at the research station. Here's my contact information. You're more than welcome to email me if you have questions, or now is a great time for questions. And if there are folks in the audience who've grown sweet potatoes and you'd like to give any input from your experience, I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurel. I do think you answered one of the questions about the pests. A farmer on the call had mentioned that they had some fair amount of rodent pressure last year, and that they were having something underneath gnawing on the tubers underground. So I know you touched on, there's not a whole lot right now other than natural predators and some other things. Bob Gilby on the line actually chimed in and said barn cats have been their salvation. So I think that's, yeah, I think it's those are things that farmers can learn from each other on, right? But I don't know if you want to touch more on the natural predators, the birds of prey, or if you have learned more about that from other farmers that have utilized that on their farm.
If I want to touch on that?
Yeah, or anybody on the call. I mean,
okay. Yeah, if anybody has experience, that's something that I've been interested in, because farmers typically have problems with voles, but also rats and mice and things like that. We have heard from some farmers that encouraging raptors on the farm can help. I just don't know how much. So if anybody has input about that, that'd be great. But we're also gonna have at least a class or two next year on those topics and invite people who are kind of in the know.
I don't know if there's anybody on the call that wants to share anything about if you've grown sweet potatoes and you have some tips, tricks, things to share, or if you have any questions for Laurel, now's the time to get those answered.
Yeah, this is Bob Gilby again over on the Kitsap Peninsula.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for this webinar. Of the 7 years or 8 years that we've been on our property here in South Kitsap County, I've tried to grow sweet potatoes 3 times. I actually got 2 cookable sweet potatoes the first year, and hopeless ever since. So this is water for a thirsty man. And I guess my observations is the best the best fertilizer is the farmer's shadow. And so more weed suppression on the part of the farmer and more attention to water seems to be what I'm ordering sweet potatoes for next year, this next summer. And I intend to focus on those two items as well as soil prep. Now, I guess the question is, so Territorial Seed Company offers a jet sweet potato, and I'm not near my computer, so I can't really check the maturity date. But any experience with jet sweet potatoes?
The name Jet, I think there's more to the name than that. It's what is it? I think that is one. Is it Georgia Jet, maybe?
Georgia Jet. That's it. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one that has been recommended by another farmer in Washington, and that one I believe is being included in the variety trials at the Northwest Research and Extension Center. So I can't speak from experience for that one, but I can double check. Maybe I think I have your email address from the registration process. I can
Yes.
find out. I know they talked about including that. I can double check to make sure it got in the trials, and we can, share the information that we get from those trials, or you can come to the field day on September 7th.
Yeah. So Territorial Seed Company is down in Oregon, west of the Cascades. So I pretty much trust their offerings. So I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. I'll be curious. Please do share, and yeah.
So Laurel, I think that's a good time to chime in on this, because I did get a direct message for one of the participants about the trial and like questions about the trial, and can farmers still take part potentially next year in the trial? And so I don't know if you want to give a little bit quick background. I know at the beginning you kind of talked about it, but kind of give a background of what exactly you've been doing, how long this trial is going to last for with the funding through Western SARE, and then also how folks can access you with our Regional Small Farms team if they have further questions or if they want to try growing sweet potatoes.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Jess. So for the sweet potato trials, we have two levels of trials being done. Well, we have trials at the research station, because that always helps, because they, as I mentioned, they can grow varieties that aren't available to the public. So I'll just say that the benefit of that is we can give our input for getting those varieties released because of their value to Pacific Northwest farmers. So that's the value of having those on the research station. Off the research station, we have two kind of levels of participation. This year we have two farms that are hosting, we call them block trials. And so my intention had been to try 4 varieties, Covington and Beauregard, just because they're kind of industry standards, and then Cascade, which was a recently released wireworm resistant one. And then there was a second wireworm resistant one that I mentioned didn't get released on time. So the folks hosting the block trials, they each block is 10 feet of each variety. So they host 3 blocks. So it ends up being about 150 or 200 row feet that they need to dedicate for that. For that, I and others on the research team come out and plant the trial. We put in soil monitoring, moisture and temperature probes in the plot, and we collect the main data there. The second way that folks can participate is doing an observational trial. And so for those folks, my goal was to give people enough sweet potato roots to produce enough to grow 10 feet of each variety. So it's just a total of 30 row feet. But our policy is we say, okay, plant 30 row feet, 10 of each variety, but as a farmer, you plant what you have space for. So some people are planting more, some people less, some people in their slip production failed in 1 or 2 of the varieties. So it's so it looks different. And those folks, the farmers do the production and planting themselves. Historically, we've just given the farmers a questionnaire to say, when did you plant? And then collect some very simple data when they harvest. But this year, I think there's a new graduate student, shout out to Laura Schultz. She's doing a good job. She was going to come out and help collect data. So we might actually visit some or all of the farms that are doing the observational trials to participate in harvest, just to and data collection, just to get more consistent data. So the observational trial is the most likely place that we'll have space for other people to participate. I did put money, it's our policy in the Regional Small Farms program to try to get money in grants to pay farmers for their time and their space for these trials. So both the observational and the block trials, there's a small stipend that goes with those. And also those farms have the opportunity to host classes or farm tours related to this study on their farm as well. So I think this year I have 12 people participating in the observational trial. I anticipate some people will drop out just because, they might have goals and say, nope, this is not worth my time, or this process was harder than I thought, or I just have different priorities. So I don't expect all 12 people to come back next year. So I can take names, and if we have enough plant materials, I'd love to just, spread the wealth and have as many people participate as possible. So, yeah, Jess, what was the?
I think that answered your question. I'm going to put your email in the chat so that anybody who has interest can email you for the next round, and then you can maybe put them on a list. But I think, what are other ways? Because, so I don't know if you introduced yourself at the beginning in this manner, but so Laurel actually is our regional IPM specialist, and she can cover providing assistance, technical assistance to farmers in Clallam, Jefferson, and Kitsap County. So if you are a farmer that is in this county specifically, Laurel is an amazing resource for you with integrated pest management specifically, but because she's actually leading this trial here for those observation farms and the block trials, she is also a resource for you in that way. So if you've been growing sweet potatoes, I think Bob mentioned he's had some problems in the past and he's going to keep trying, but like she's also an amazing resource for you in that capacity, so that if you are running into problems or you need assistance with something, you can reach out to Laurel as well with that. So I don't know if you want to say anything else about kind of how you can assist farmers in that manner.
Yeah. So my email address is up there on the screen and then also in the chat box. But we also, if you haven't been to the Regional Small Farms website, I highly encourage you to go there. We have there you can reach me and other members of the Regional Small Farms team through our technical assistance portal. So any question you have related to farming, put it in the portal. Jess is the one who watches the back end of that. If it's something about pests or diseases or weeds, she'll send it to me. If it's something about marketing or land access or any number of other questions, there's other folks that have more expertise with that than I do. And just so you know how I work, I love to, I can help answer questions over the phone, over email. You can send me pictures. I can come out to your farm and visit. All those are options. I'm pretty good at knowing the limits of my abilities. So there's a whole team of other pathologists and entomologists and folks that I can connect to at WSU, who, if your question is beyond my ability, I either send it directly to them or just, give them a call. So there's lots of resources through that tech portal, technical assistance portal. On the website, you'll also find, there is, Jess, what is it called? Resources.
So the online learning library, or
yeah, thank you. Online learning library, you'll find other recorded presentations on all sorts of topics. Like if you've had trouble with flea beetles, there's a dirt talk on that. There's a whole series of things about loans and other financial farm related things. So I encourage you to go look at that learning library, and then you'll find a link to sign up for a newsletter. I'm assuming you guys all get that because you're here, but but you can sign up for that on the website. There's great resources.
Yeah, and I would definitely encourage folks who haven't signed up for the newsletter to do so, because Laurel mentioned some upcoming classes within this body of work for the sweet potato trials that are going to be coming up. One is the next one in early September for the field day at the research center, and that's going to have registration coming out soon. And so those newsletters and that email list that you'll get signed up for will give you kind of first access to that information, and you can sign up sooner than later with that information. I did put the link to the website in the chat, as well as Laurel's email. I do want to point out that I will be sending out a follow-up email to all the people that registered today. And so you will get a follow-up email that will include her contact information, a PDF version of this slideshow, and a link to the online learning library for the video. So definitely reach out to Laurel. That technical assistance, like she said, on the website, if you are a farmer in our 3 counties, feel free to browse the website. On the right-hand sidebar, there is the farmer technical assistance form. Don't be shy. If you have anything that you need help with for yourself on your farm, please make sure to reach out to us, and we'll point you to the person that can best assist you.
And I just wanted to mention, I seem to be having slow internet here, but I just put in the chat box a link to the sweet potato page at the Northwest Research and Extension Center. There are a list of publications that you might find very helpful. There is a slip production guide, there's a production guide, and there's a curing and storage guide for sweet potatoes. Those were put together by Shurijana Shrita, the graduate student. And as a part of this project, we're actually going to be updating those with, the additional information that we learn. So anyway, those guides are there. And they cover just about everything I covered in this presentation. So take a look at that page. You can also see some reports on the preliminary research that they did at the research station as well.
That's great. Well, last chance, folks. Does anybody have any questions for Laurel that didn't get answered, or things that you want to share before we end the call?
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I'm going to assume that that's a no. I always like to wait a few minutes. Some people don't unmute. But yeah, we will be following up with that email with resources and attachments. And then also there'll be a link inside the body of that email that will take you to Laurel's evaluation for the class. It is very helpful for us as a team, so we can do planning for future classes. And then, yes, please do respond to that as well.
I'm looking forward to sweet potato vines with bacon.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Have a great evening. And hopefully we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you.